Hi, and welcome to episode number 5 of Ask Ian. My name is Ian Westerman, and I'm the head pro at EssentialTennis.com. Today, we're going to be answering a question for KW Tennis Nation, who wrote to me and said, stroke mechanic instruction is very cookie cutter these days. Yet, if you follow competitive tennis, i.e. NCAA or futures, you will notice that there's lots of different ways to play high-level tennis. Of particular note is, as an example, double-handed backhand off both wings that isn't taught by cookie-cutter teachers. What is your take on how these varieties make it through to higher levels of tennis? Well, KW, that's a great question, and in my opinion, those varieties make it through even the higher levels of play because there's an unlimited number of ways to be good at tennis. And there's an unlimited number of ways to win at the game of tennis. There's so many different variations because all of us are put together a little bit differently. We have different athletic abilities and talents and skills. And the lower you get in terms of level, the more variety you see. There's certain fundamentals that kind of have to be present in order to kind of transcend the ranks of tennis, and especially to really become a very high-level player like an NCAA player or somebody who's playing futures or at the pro level. But even at those high levels, and even at the top levels among professional players, you will see very different styles, even today. And if you don't believe that's true, then you're probably only tuning in for Djokovic versus Nadal, or Federer versus Murray, or whatever. If you're only watching the top players, then you're not going to see a ton of variety. You still do. You'll see single-handed backhand or double-handed backhand. You'll see more of a counterpunch style versus maybe more of an offensive style. But as you get down even to 20 in the world, 30 in the world, 40 in the world, you start to see a lot of variety. And that's because there's just a lot of different ways to play the game. And that's part of what really makes tennis fascinating and also fun to learn. Now, addressing your question about pros and instruction, you said that there's a lot of cookie-cutter instruction out there these days. Guess what? There's always been a lot of cookie-cutter technique instruction. And quite frankly, that's because not just in tennis, but really in any field where somebody's teaching or coaching somebody else, that's really just kind of the way it goes. Most coaches or teachers are just going to go with the status quo, follow what everybody else kind of says, and just kind of use those kind of catchphrases like turn to the side, step in to your forehand, meet it out in front, keep your eye on the ball, and the list goes on and on and on. Kind of your generic cookie cutter methodology or instruction or tips. Those are things that have been around for decades and decades and decades. I was actually just recently watching an old Johnny Carson clip of Bobby Riggs on Johnny Carson. It was a hilarious clip. You can look it up on YouTube. And Bobby Riggs was trying to give a lesson to Johnny Carson. This is back in, I don't know what year it was. It must have been at least the 70s. And it was hilarious to hear Bobby Riggs' tips to Johnny Carson. It's like the same thing that your generic kind of cookie cutter pros are still saying today. And this is, my point here is not to bash or badmouth teaching pros in general. Not at all. As I said a minute ago, when you go to any kind of field or profession like that, the fact of the matter is the majority of the people that are transmitting or transferring that information are just going to do it in a very generic way. So your job is to find, as somebody who's tuning in today, your job is to find a pro who thinks outside of the box, doesn't do things in the generic cookie cutter way that everybody else does, because you are not a generic cookie cutter tennis player. We're all different. We all have, as I said before, we all have different skills, strengths and weaknesses. We all have different athletic, builds and bodies, and we're all going to have different tendencies. And so you want to find a teaching professional that is willing to think outside of the box, has the ability to explain the same concept in many different ways, and doesn't approach his or her instruction the same way for every student. Because we're all different. Those of us who play and those of us who are passionate about improving, we're all different. And so if you don't have a teaching pro that can teach you a little bit different than Sally, and teach Sally a little bit different than Steve, then, there's only a probably just a small percentage of what they're telling you that's really truly going to sink in and serve you as a player. So that's really the hard part as a student, is finding that instruction that's really, I hate to keep using the same phrase, but outside the box. So KW, hopefully that's helpful to you. Hopefully a little bit of what I had to share there sheds a little bit of light, I guess, on the process, and it's just kind of the reality of what instruction is, and hopefully you can find somebody who can really give you that next level of insight and guidance towards improving your own teaching and your own learning as a player as well. So with that, I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're watching on YouTube right now and you enjoyed this, do me a favor and click like. Also subscribe to Essential Tennis here on YouTube so that you don't miss out on any future lessons or episodes of Ask Ian. And if you have a question that you'd like me to answer in a future episode, leave that right down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again very soon.